everyone, and welcome back to the Wisdom by Harry YouTube channel. My name is Harry.
And I'm Mary. We're so excited to have you here today for another fascinating episode.
So today we're diving into something I think a lot of you out there are probably working on, trying to master learning English. But not just from textbooks. We're talking about using podcast conversations to level up your skills.
Yeah, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently because it really taps into the living, breathing heart of a language, It's one thing to memorize vocabulary lists and, do all that kind of stuff. It's a whole different ball game to hear how those words are actually used in a natural conversation.
You pick up on all those little things like slang, idioms, the way tone changes meaning, and things that can really make or break your fluency.
Exactly. And that's what makes podcasts such a powerful tool. It's like you're getting a window into everyday English conversations.
So to really understand how this works, we found this fantastic YouTube channel. It's called English Podcast Zone. And they have this episode called Apologizing. And in this episode, you have this couple. And they're having this kind of tense back and forth. And it's packed with all these little learning moments.
Right. And what I think is so clever about it is they don't just present the dialogue. They break it down piece by piece. They have this segment called Fluency Builder. And in this segment, they'll look at these subtle differences between phrases like, to love versus to be in love.
Oh.
And you might think, those are basically the same thing, right?
I would have thought that.
But there are these important nuances that native speakers will pick up on instinctively. And the podcast does a really great job of highlighting those and explaining how they can change the entire meaning of what you're saying. So it's like a secret decoder ring for English conversation.
And speaking of decoding, they also point out how a lot of these seemingly simple phrases can take on a whole different meaning, depending on the context. And they use the example, can we talk?
Oh, yeah.
Now, on the surface, that sounds pretty straightforward, right?
Right. But in reality, it often signals that a serious conversation is coming, and maybe not a pleasant one.
Right.
It's a phrase loaded with potential subtext, and they do a really great job of unpacking that.
And I thought it was really eye-opening how they explain that even a phrase like, you know what I mean, can function as either a statement or a question, depending on your tone of voice.
Oh, that's so interesting.
I mean, that's something you wouldn't necessarily get just from reading a dictionary definition.
Absolutely. And that's where the conversational aspect comes in. You start to understand that spoken English isn't just about the word themselves, it's about the delivery, the pauses, the inflections, all those subtle cues that convey so much meaning.
Yeah, and then going beyond, analyzing specific phrases. The podcast also breaks down these bigger chunks of dialogue, like, where is this relationship going? Or maybe it's time we. Some of those, I have to admit, made me cringe a little. But hey, that's real life relationship talk, right?
And that's the beauty of it. You're getting exposed to authentic language as it's actually used, not some sanitized textbook version. And what I like is they don't just leave you hanging with these potentially awkward phrases. They offer alternative ways to express those same ideas, which is so valuable for building your vocabulary and developing flexibility in your language use.
Right. It's like they're giving you a toolbox of different phrases.
Yeah.
For different situations.
Exactly.
So instead of being stuck with one way to say something, you've got options, which makes you sound more natural and confident.
Right. And that confidence is key because when you feel comfortable with the language, you're more likely to actually use it and engage in conversations.
Now, one of the things I found particularly interesting was their segment on pet names. I mean, we all know them, honey, sweetheart, darling,
But they dug a little deeper, didn't they? They talked about how some of these terms can sound a bit cheesy or even outdated. And they brought in examples from other languages, which I thought was really interesting. It really highlighted how expressions of affection can vary across cultures. It's a fascinating window into the cultural nuances of language. It really makes you realize that learning a language isn't just about memorizing words and grammar rules. It's about understanding the cultural context in which those words are used and how they can convey different meanings or emotions, depending on the situation.
Yeah, and I love that they encourage viewers to share their own language's pet names in the comments. I like turning the whole thing into a global conversation about language and culture. Okay, so we've talked a lot about this specific podcast episode, but let's zoom out a bit. What does all this mean for someone who's trying to improve their English through podcasts in general?
Well, first and foremost, I think it highlights the importance of choosing podcasts that feature natural, unscripted conversations. You want to hear how real people talk. with all the hesitations and,
Yep.
all the slang and idioms that make up everyday language.
So not just like a news broadcast or something super formal.
Exactly. You want that raw, authentic language. Think of it this way. If you're learning to play basketball, you wouldn't just study diagrams in a book. You'd get out on the court and practice with other players.
Right. That's a great analogy. So listening to conversational podcasts is like it's your practice court for English conversation.
Precisely. It helps you develop your ear for the rhythm and flow of spoken English. You start to pick up on those subtle cues. That signal changes in meaning or emphasis. And the more you listen, the more natural those patterns become.
So it's not just about understanding what people are saying, it's about understanding how they're saying it.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. And it's something that traditional language learning methods often miss. Textbooks can teach you vocabulary and grammar, but they can't fully capture the nuances of spoken language.
But with podcasts, you're immersed in that world. You're hearing how native speakers express themselves in different situations, with different tones of voice, different levels of formality.
And that exposure is invaluable. It helps you build your fluency, your confidence, and your ability to navigate real-world English conversations. Now, I know some people might feel a little bit overwhelmed, by the idea of listening to podcasts in English, especially if they're still at the beginner level. But the key is to start with something that interests you.
Right, because if you're genuinely engaged with the topic, you're more likely to stick with it.
Absolutely. I mean, there are podcasts out there on literally every topic imaginable. Find something you're passionate about, whether it's sports, music, movies, or even true crime, and just start listening. Don't worry if you don't understand every word at first. The goal is to gradually build your comprehension skills over time.
And don't be afraid to use tools like transcripts or subtitles to help you along the way.
Yeah, those can be really helpful. Especially in the beginning, you can read along as you listen, which helps you connect the spoken word with the written word. Another tip is to listen for phrases that you hear repeatedly. These are often common expressions or idioms that are essential for fluency, so jot those down, look them up, and try to use them in your own conversations.
It's like building your own personal phrase book based on real-life usage.
Exactly. And the beauty of this approach is that you're learning language in a way that's engaging and enjoyable. It doesn't feel like work. It feels like entertainment.
And the more you enjoy it, the more likely you are to stick with it and see real progress. So to kind of sum things up, using conversational podcasts to learn English is about way more than just vocabulary and grammar. It's about immersing yourself in the culture of the language, understanding the nuances of spoken English, and developing the confidence to use it in real-world situations.
And it's about having fun while you learn. Because let's face it, learning should be a joy, not a chore. Now, before we wrap up, there's one more thought I want to leave you with. We've talked about the benefits of using podcasts for language learning, but I think there's kind of a deeper layer here as well.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, think about it. When you listen to a podcast conversation, you're not just learning words, you're gaining insights into how people think, how they interact, how they view the world.
You're getting a glimpse into their culture, their values, their perspectives.
Exactly. So beyond language acquisition, I think there's an opportunity here to use podcast conversations as a tool for developing intercultural understanding and empathy.
That's such a powerful idea.
Right.
It's like listening to a podcast isn't just about learning a language, it's about connecting with people on a deeper level. And maybe, just maybe, breaking down some of the barriers that divide us.
That's a beautiful thought, and one that I think speaks to the true power of language.
Wow, yeah. That really gets you thinking. We often talk about language as a tool for communication, but it's so much more than that. It's a tool for connection, for understanding, for building bridges between cultures.
Yeah, it really is. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's such an important thing to keep in mind as you embark on your language learning journey. It's not just about acquiring a skill, it's about opening yourself up to new ways of seeing the world.
So on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. What are some key takeaways that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think the biggest one is to really embrace the power of conversational podcasts for learning English. They offer such a rich and authentic learning experience that you just can't get from textbooks alone.
And don't be afraid to experiment, right? Find podcasts that you genuinely enjoy listening to,
Yeah,
because that's when the real learning magic happens.
absolutely. And remember that it's a journey. It takes time and effort. But with patience and perseverance, you can achieve fluency and open up a whole new world of possibilities.
Beautifully said. Well, Mary, it looks like we've reached the end of another deep dive.
Man, what a fascinating dive it was. I don't know about you, Harry, but I am feeling inspired to go find some new podcasts to listen to.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I hope our viewers are feeling the same way. If you're trying to improve your English, or even if you're just curious about the power of language, I encourage you to give conversational podcasts a try. You might be surprised at what you discover.
And don't forget to check out the English Podcast Zone on YouTube. They have tons of great resources for English language learners.
As always, we want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell us about your favorite podcasts for learning English, or any other tips you have for our fellow language enthusiasts.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more explorations into the world of knowledge and ideas.
Until next time, happy learning.